You've probably come across this Fire Knight a couple times in Shadow of the Erdtree and found them very annoying, but what if I told you that there's an entire mini questline around this particular Fire Knight that allows you to get very unique items from him? I'll be very quickly walking you through that entire questline and the rewards, so let's get into it. Now, to progress the mini questline of Fire Knight Queelign, and I'm probably butchering the name drastically, so I apologize, you're going to want to fight him in two unique locations. One you can't really miss. That one location is inside the Ballarat Tower settlement from the site of grace I was just showing you shortly. You're going to very quickly see this giant tree in the middle of a courtyard, seemingly all by itself. While you're in this area, you're going to be invaded by Fire Knight Queelign. This will more than likely be the first time you end up fighting him, so be prepared because in the beginning of this DLC, you're not very strong. Of course, take your time to actually defeat this guy because you will get some nice items from him if you defeat him. Again, it's going to depend on where you defeat him, what items you're going to be getting. For example, in this particular location, you're going to get the Crusade Insignia Talisman. This talisman allows you to raise the attack power of yourself after defeating an enemy. Very useful when you're fighting a bunch of enemies all at once. And like I mentioned earlier, you need to defeat him a couple times, so this is just location 1. Let's move on to location 2. And this second location really isn't all that much farther away. You're going to be in the Plateau region. You want to make your way over to the Church of Crusade. In here, you're going to have the same exact experience that you had inside the Ballarat Tower settlement. Once you go in there, you'll see a little bit of random items spread throughout the area, but as you progress through this location, take your time to the giant statue in the back that shows America. You're going to get invaded by Fire Knight Queelign once again. Now, it's the same idea as before. He's going to invade you just like any other NPC that invades your world, and you're going to want to defeat him as best as you possibly can. Once you have defeated him, he will have another monologue just like he had before when you previously defeated him, and then he will also drop the Ash of War Flame Skewer and a prayer room key. This prayer room key is going to be very important because since you defeated him twice now, you can move to the final location. This final location is going to be inside of the Shadow Keep in a very particular location. I'll show you the jumping puzzle that I usually do when I go into this area. You want to go from the Church District site of grace and follow the jumping that I'm showing you because it's going to take you to a very particular drop down in the ceiling of the Shadow Keep. Now keep in mind, as you're progressing over these rooftops and the jumps, there are going to be enemies that are going to try to explode and knock you off into the water if you haven't lowered the water yet, and a Fire Knight that's going to throw fireballs at you, once again just trying to knock you off the roof. Now that you made your jump down into this particular area, you'll see this giant overhanging area that you want to jump down even further into, and you're going to come across a couple crabs. What you want to do is then make your way to the back of this room where you see a door. The prayer room key you got at the second location when you defeated Queelign twice is going to open up this room. In here, you're going to see Queelign huddled in the fetal position, and it's just going to be wailing to himself, essentially. At this point, you're going to come across either two different options or none, depending if you have an Iris of Occultation or an Iris of Grace, which is really going to end up determining what you get from him at the end of this questline. There are two different locations for each of the irises, so 4 irises in total. One of them for the Iris of Occultation is at Fort Reprimand. You're going to have to jump into a very particular location in Fort Reprimand to get the first one. So once you're in the center of Fort Reprimand in the main square area, you'll see something that looks like a well. Jump into this well and make your way down to where all these giant bodies are, and if this is your first time there, you'll see a bunch of different items. What you want to do is be prepared for the Omen Killer that will attack you. What you have to do is then defeat this Omen Killer, who is then going to drop that first Iris of Occultation. Simple enough. The second Iris of Occultation is from another enemy as well, but it's underneath the water inside of the Shadow Keep, so we have to lower the water first. From the prayer room where you're doing this questline, backtrack a little bit to where you jump down into this area and take a quick left to where you see a bunch of bats. From this, follow the pathing all the way until you come across a ladder that takes you up to a lever. As you might have guessed, this is going to be the lever that drops all the water inside of the Shadow Keep that will now open up an extra area of the Shadow Keep that you can't access any other way. Now all the water is gone, go back down the ladder and you'll see that the archway that used to have a ton of water in it no longer has water. What you want to do is jump down into this area. This is the brand new area that is now available to you inside the Shadow Keep, and go into the first ransacked house. You're going to see a site of grace that will be our starting point moving forward. Now from this side of grace, you essentially wanted to get to the other side of this area where you can see more ransacked giant houses, giant old churches, however you want to describe them. And what you want to do in this area, when you get to the other side, you'll actually eventually get attacked by an enemy. This enemy is going to be one of those annoying tree sentinels that swings a ton and it bursts a bunch of flames around it. You have to defeat this enemy to get the second Iris of Occultation. Now with the 2 Irises of Occultation, let's go after the Irises of Grace. From that same area that we just started for the previous Iris of Occultation, the Sunken Chapel site of Grace, follow the pathing I'm showing you, which leads you to a very long elevator. At the end of this elevator, you'll come across another site of grace. This site of grace will be a nice little starting point for you. This is the Tree Worship Passage site of grace. This also gets you over to one of the Remembrance bosses if you haven't been here before. But to stay on topic for the Iris of Grace, simply just follow the path forward and you'll come across a hidden church that's going to have another giant statue of America that will at the foot of it have the Iris of Grace. Now for the second Iris of Grace, you want to make your way to the Storehouse first floor site of grace inside of the Shadow Keep. From this site of grace, you want to go to the left where you see another set of small enemies. Behind the small group of enemies, you're going to come across another elevator that you want to take all the way down. At the bottom, you want to take an immediate right and follow the pathing I'm showing you because there's a couple different locations you can go to. But the main idea that we want to do is get to this large open area where you see a bunch of pots. At the end of this room, you're going to see a purple item behind an enemy. This is your second Iris of Grace. So now that you have at least one of the Irises of Grace and Occultation, you want to make your way back to the prayer room with Fire Knight Queelign. Now, if you decide to give him the Iris of Grace, you'll actually get him as a new spirit summon. If you give him the Iris of Occultation, you will get his personal weapon, his greatsword. Now, of course, it really comes down to personal preference if you want the summon or the greatsword. Personally, I went with the Iris of Grace because that was one thing that I wanted to try and see how good his summon was in particular fights, but I've seen a lot of people saying that the greatsword is absolutely phenomenal as well. So again, it's really up to personal preference which one you want to pick. But something to keep in mind for your decision is that the Ashen War you got by defeating him, Flame Skewer, can be put onto his greatsword and make a very devastating combo. So something to keep in mind when you're completing this quest line. Now again, I don't want to spoil everything that goes along with this when it pertains to the actual quest line rewards depending on which Iris you end up using on Fire Knight Queelign. Just to leave a little bit of a decision for you so you don't say that yes, this one's way better than the other. It's a decision that you get to make in your playthrough of the DLC. So I hope overall this walkthrough guide was very helpful for you. If you did find it useful, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below so I know that you did find it helpful. Let me know your favorite part of this quest line when you do go through it down in the comments, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.